and welcome to a really interesting edition of Ben's Junk. Yeah, I'm gonna reel you in with this one, and I think you know exactly where I'm going with this. But anyway, I should also note here that this is a by request Ben's Junk. I've had a few requests for this over the last few years for whatever strange reason. And it works out just fine because at the moment that I'm making this, I'm trying to work on this year's season finale for the regular Oddity archive episodes, and this gives me something quick and easy to do while I'm working on that other project. But yes, as implied quite heavily, we're going to be looking at my pretty modest collection of albums on reel-to-reel audio tape. Now, I own easily north of 100 reel-to-reel audio tapes, but only 16 of those are, real pre-recorded, proper albums, that you went to the record store and bought, and, they have the artwork and everything. And one would think, given my history with this format, that I would own more, but I don't. I've never gotten into it as a format. Most titles that came out on reel-to-reel were only at 3 3/4 inches per second. They tended not to sound very good. They tended to be very muddy. They tended to not be mastered terribly well. So yeah, I've just never really gotten into it. And really the reason I have 16 tapes at all is I've just picked a lot of them up indiscriminately at thrift stores over the years. 2 of these were sent in by a viewer at one point. I think I've only really sought out 4 of the ones that I own. But anyway, it just works out that of those 16 tapes, 8 of them fall into total cheese territory, and the other 8 are good or at least good-ish albums, what we would generally consider to be good or good-ish. Of course, all of this stuff is from the 60s and 70s. That was the heyday of this format, so just by definition. But anyway, yeah, well, let's just dive right into the cheese here. Now, today's first 2 albums came from the same thrift store. I bought them on the same day, and they clearly came from the same person's collection. But we'll discuss that more in a moment here. So yeah, on the cheapy Hallmark label, we have got the Francis Bay Orchestra Plays tribute to Glenn Miller. I have no idea when this thing is from. I would guess approximately 1965. But strangely enough, despite this being on a cheapy label like Hallmark, this is a full tilt 7.5 inch per second tape. But anyway, let's get back to how I know these first 2 tapes were from the same collection. Take a look at that sticker there. I'll try and get the light to hit it just right. It says Standard Plus. Now, my first thought is, okay, with regards to audio tape, I've heard Standard Plus get used in reference to the thickness of a tape, but that wouldn't make any sense here. This is celebrating 50 years of something in 1969. Oh, I get it. It's probably the standard chain of gas stations, as an Amico standard. So I'm going to guess in 1969, they got a bunch of dead stock reel-to-reel albums, and they were probably giving them away or selling them for $1 or $2 with your 10-gallon fill-up or whatever it was. And yeah, somebody apparently, bought into that one twice. Now, I have a little confession to make about this album. Out of the 16 that I own, I have never played this one. Just this one, and it's not for any great reason, it's just never happened. But I need to sort this one out, because if you're familiar with the format, you might notice a little boo-boo here, if I can find the end of the tape here. So, what's wrong with this picture here, kids? Yeah, this is tails out from this perspective. Now, of course, I can throw this on the B-side and play it properly. But yeah, I need to, at the very least, sort this one out at some point. But yeah, I've just never been in any great hurry to listen to knockoff tribute to Glenn Miller. I will someday. Hell, maybe somebody recorded over this or it got accidentally erased or something. Who knows? But yeah, whoever owned this did not take great care of it. The tape is pretty wrinkly. Somebody kind of took a bite out of it or a big lick of it or something at some point. They had a sticker and took a big chunk of the back cover off here. But yeah, I will get around to playing this sucker someday. All right, here's that other tape from the same thrift store on the same day from the same collection. But yeah, we've got Mr. Acker-Bilk in Paris from 1966. And this is one of those standard 3 3/4 inch per second ones. And so anyway, there's a very good chance you have heard one song from this guy in your life. It's a tune called Stranger on the Shore. It was a few years old already by the time this album came around. And it's one that's been used in a bunch of movies and TV commercials and stuff, to the point where sometimes it would be used for more comedy purposes than anything else. But yeah, basically the world's most famous clarinet player here, and his concept album from 1966, as I mentioned. But yeah, if he's in Paris, guess what? There's going to be some French tunes on this thing. Now, I've only ever played this thing once, and I need to do a little straightening out for this one too. But yeah, the one time I played it, I just thought it was unremarkable. It wasn't bad or anything. It just kind of went in one ear and out the other. Just kind of, yeah, perfectly pleasant 60s instrumental mood music. All right, let's go into true schlock territory here. The Letterman and Live. That title makes no sense to me whatsoever. But anyway, yes, obviously a thrift store find at one point. And I don't know exactly when this came out, but judging from the songs, I would guess 1968 or 69. But yeah, haven't you always wanted to hear the Letterman croon their way through something like Windy, the Association tune? But yeah, this is another one I've only ever played once. It sounded exactly the way I thought it would. And yeah, I moved on with my life. All right, the next two albums are actually from the same artist. And this is the only time that I've built up two albums from the same artist on reel-to-reel. Not by design or anything. In fact, I'm pretty sure I got these at the same thrift store on the same day. But for whatever crazy reason, I peeled the sale price sticker off of one, but not the other. But anyway, yeah, we've got the best of Matt Monro here. Mr. Born Free himself. And if you've ever heard Born Free, you know what you're in for with this album. This is pure mid-60s MOR, middle-of-the-road kind of stuff. But yeah, there were no surprises with this one. I'll go ahead and open that up. But anyway, here's the other Matt Monro album from right near the same time, I would guess. I don't know exactly when these came out, but yeah, Invitation to Broadway, which, given that cover, it kind of fooled me. I really thought I was going to be getting a live album, but nope. But yeah, this is another little concept album here. In this case, it's all show tunes and kind of delivered how you'd expect out of Matt Monro. But anyway, with regards to this guy, this is how weird I am. I have watched too many silent movies in my life, and from too young an age. But when I think Matt Monro, I think Charlie Chaplin, The Pilgrim, his final short before he really went full tilt into making features. And Chaplin spent something like the last 15 years of his life writing scores for his old movies. And in the case of The Pilgrim, he also wrote a real proper song with lyrics and everything, and he brought in Matt Monro to sing it. You don't even necessarily know it's him until the end of the short, but yeah, for whatever crazy reason in my warped little brain, that's what I think of when I think of Matt Monro. All right, this next tape has appeared on Archive before. It was on the Ben's Junk that I did on my Akai reel-to-reel machine, and I'm pretty sure I picked this up at a thrift store, but I couldn't tell you when exactly. Johnny Mathis, You've Got a Friend, probably from late 1971, maybe early 1972. Now, of course, Mathis, his whole thing for most of his career was him just running through a handful of the latest hits from other artists, even if his own versions kind of only sold to his existing fan base. So in this case, You've Got a Friend, so the Carole King tune that James Taylor wound up having the hit with. But yeah, it's kind of the greatest hits of 1971 here. So yeah, it's You've Got a Friend, the Bee Gees, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart, Sammy Smith, Help Me Make It Through the Night, Gordon Lightfoot, If You Could Read My Mind. There's a proper Carole King cover on here, Stevie Wonder's rendition of We Can Work It Out, Bread, If, The Carpenters, For All We Know, and so on and so on. Now, I don't remember doing this, but I clearly cared enough to not only tape this off, but actually give it some leader at some point. Now, this tape sounds terrible. It's another 3 3/4 inch per second special. It has almost no high end to it. It's a very thuddy, bass heavy, in a very unpleasant way sort of album. And again, I'd much rather hear the real proper hits on here. So this is truly one of those deals where I really would only use it for sacrificial purposes, for testing purposes. All right, this next one I'm pretty sure is the first reel-to-reel tape I ever bought at a thrift store. I couldn't tell you exactly where or when, but it seems about right. So we got Tom Jones, What's New Pussycat? Whoa, 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 from 1965. Unfortunately for me, that's pretty much the only keeper on here. Now, this was truly my sacrificial tape for a while. But anyway, as far as the rest of the album goes, it's mostly tunes written by Tom Jones's manager, a guy named Gordon Mills, who went on to manage Gilbert O'Sullivan later on and wound up in a ton of legal trouble with him. And yeah, tellingly, What's New Pussycat is a Burt Bacharach tune. The quality in songwriting changes quite a bit. But yeah, of course, it's Tom Jones. He oversins everything. He's always kind of Mr. Camp anyway. But anyway, at least I cared enough to tape this one off at some point. And this is kind of an unusual one in that it's labeled on both sides of the reel here. And the B-side here fell off at one point, this label, and I had to give it a couple of spritzes of Scotch 77 and stick it back on. Unfortunately, my aim was slightly off, but oh well. And even though I don't care that much for this album, as far as a 3 3/4 inch per second album goes, this actually sounds quite good. And there's a reason I kept using this as a test tape. So again, even if I didn't care much for the album, hey, at least it's got the one good song and it sounds good. All right, here is the last of the cheesy albums, but at the same time, it's the first of two that were sent to me by a viewer a few years ago as a Christmas present, just out of the blue. Unfortunately, I'll discuss this more in just a moment here, but things done went wrong with this one. So anyway, yeah, this is Nancy Sinatra, Movin' with Nancy. This is from 1967 or 68. This is home to Some Velvet Morning, if you've ever heard that tune, one of the ones she did with Lee Hazelwood. And, you know, truly one of those schlock-tastic tunes. But anyway, it's kind of disappointing here in that this is a full tilt Warner Brothers 7.5 inch per second tape. Usually these things are pretty decent. But yeah, and the guy that sent this to me, he would have had no way of knowing this, but whoever played this last, or rewound or fast forward or whatever, way back when, it could have been way back in the 60s, at some point, maybe he stopped the tape partway through and the tape got twisted and he didn't notice it and then went to play the rest of the album. But the album from that point out, it works out to the first third of side one or the final third of side two, I should say. And the tape just got totally mangled. And there's like a couple minutes worth of just completely messed up, mangled tape. And unfortunately, this was not stored very well and it all melted together at some point. So from the twisted point on out, the tape was just totally screwed and I had to cut off what amounted to 6 or 7 minutes per side of this album. So this isn't even a complete copy. This is truly a sacrificial copy. But the guy that sent this to me had no way of knowing that. But yeah, it sits in my little wooden crate that I keep of tapes as a truly disposable tape. All right, let's move on to the good, or at least good-ish albums. And this is the second of those albums that was sent to me as a Christmas present a couple of years ago, or whenever that was. But yeah, Johnny Cash's Greatest Hits Volume 1 from 1967. In other words, this was just before Johnny Cash really hit his commercial peak. This was just ahead of the two Prison albums, the Folsom Prison album and San Quentin. So yeah, a case of a premature greatest hits, but then again, Volume 1. So I've never done a deep dive into Johnny Cash's catalog. I've only ever owned the two Prison albums and some cheapy greatest hits of his. But a couple songs on this may be re-recordings. I'm not quite sure. Something sounds a little off about them to me. They might have been ones that he had done for Sun Records initially and had to re-record for Columbia, but I'll leave that to the experts. But anyway, this actually had a little bit of a snag going on with it, like the Nancy Sinatra one, but nowhere near as severe. So whenever somebody had played this last before it wound up in my hands, either their machine seized up or they hit the wrong button at just the right moment. But the tape snagged or seized and it got pulled apart, stretched. And so it's just the plastic backing and it's just hanging on by a thread. But thankfully, it was still in the leader portion of the tape, so no music quite yet. And I was able to just snip that little piece off, and you can see that I gave this one a real nice, proper white leader and taped it off and everything, and just tried to make this one nice. But I have yet to find a Columbia Records 3 3/4 inch per second tape that sounds any good. This tape is just pure mud. And otherwise, this had, I guess you could say, a couple of goodies in it. It still had the sticker to hold down the tape, but the adhesive has long since worn off, but I just can't bear to throw it out. It's not like it's going to hurt anything in here. And hey, we can send away for a catalog on just 8 tracks and whatever other tape formats. But yeah, I'll definitely call this one a keeper. All right, speaking of premature greatest hits compilations, this has got to be one of the ultimate ones. The Rascals, Timepiece, The Rascals' Greatest Hits from 1968. And this thing was a friggin' smash when it came out. This was a #1 album, which generally doesn't even happen with greatest hits. But yeah, it sold a few million copies. For the most part, it's managed to stay in print all these years. And it is, despite being premature, a very well-programmed, well-put-together compilation. But anyway, premature in that just like less than 6 months after this came out, they had their song People Got to Be Free, one of those songs that you probably have heard at some point in your life. And it was a full-tilt #1 uber smash. And you'd think Atlantic would have just tacked it on to here eventually, but they never did. And indeed, they had a few more top 40s after that, and those obviously aren't here no matter what pressing of this you find. But also, as a bit of trivia, once upon a time, this was the cheapest, most plentiful album, on vinyl at least, on Discogs. And that is no reflection of the quality of the album. Of course, it's the Rascals, so it's kind of their little hybrid of garage rock and R&B and just a touch of jazz in there as well. But yeah, I always wanted to sing like Felix Cavallari, but obviously I could truly never pull that one off. But anyway, yeah. I think really the reason this was such a huge hit was the final cut. It's just barely visible in the track list, but yeah, A Beautiful Morning. It's a Beautiful Morning. You have heard that at some point in your life. And yeah, now I own all the regular Rascals albums, but I've had to keep a copy of this. I actually own 3 copies of this. I'll explain that in a moment. But I've had to keep a copy of this kicking around because that song, A Beautiful Morning, never did find a home on any of the Rascals' regular albums. So, if I want it, only one of their biggest hits, if not their biggest hit, I had to have it somewhere. So I've owned this on CD, and the CD does not sound good. It is from probably like 3rd generation tapes, a lot of hiss, and what you do hear is very flat sounding. I've owned this on vinyl. It was just out of a dollar bin somewhere, but in good condition. And then this is my most expensive reel-to-reel tape. And I tried to go all the way with this one. I got the full tilt 7.5 inch per second version of this. Unfortunately, it's in perfectly decent condition, but it's just a very muddy sounding tape. It just wasn't very well put together. So yeah, bummer there. But I think I spent between 25 and 30 bucks on this. This is truly my record holder, pardon the pun, for most expensive reel-to-reel tape. All right, I've discussed this one before. I'll try and keep it brief. Bird Maniacs by the Byrds. So I covered this fairly recently on an episode on albums that I'm supposed to hate, but I really genuinely love. And this is one of those albums I kind of expect to see Todd in the Shadows eventually do a Train Records episode on. But yeah, this is allegedly the album that killed the Byrds' career. It killed them right in the middle of their comeback, and so on and so forth. But I actually really like this one. Save for 1 or 2 cuts, I think it's a very, very good batch of tunes. The problem with the album is it just doesn't sound very good. So in the case of this thing, the number one complaint it's always had would be the use of strings and horns on some of the songs. Sometimes it's obviously supposed to be there, sometimes maybe not so much. But once or twice it kind of overwhelms it. But even then, that's not really the big deal. It's more that it just has a really crappy mix. It's a muddy, throbbing mess. And at one point I went down a bit of a rabbit hole with this album because I wasn't entirely sure if it was a mix problem or a mastering problem. But yeah, I have accrued 4 copies of this album over the years. The reel-to-reel, the original vinyl from '71, and the first 2 CD issues of it. And I can safely say that it's a mix problem. It's not a mastering issue. So anyway, this is another one of those Columbia 3 3/4 inch per second deals. It does not sound good. It just exacerbates the bad mix. If anything, I guess if you're a bass player, you might really like it. Skip Batten's bass, you really get to hear it on this one. And the guy was a great bass player, but that seems to be about the only benefit to this one. Well, and for some freaky reason, on the first cut, Glory, Glory, there's a little guitar solo from Clarence White on here, and it seems to get buried in other formats, but for some reason it kind of pokes out more, kind of in spite of itself. It's weird. All right, this next album is pretty spotty, but it hasn't stopped me from owning it 3 times over the years. And this has appeared on Archive before. This appeared on, I believe, the episode I did just after I got my TIAC 3300, my still daily driver reel-to-reel machine. But yeah, we've got We 5, Make Someone Happy. This is from 1967. And it's very hit and miss, but the good parts, in my opinion, are quite good. Their real strength was as a folk rock band, but they always seem to be fighting their own strengths. But anyway, I think this was a case of taking too long to do a follow-up. So 2 years earlier, they had a tune called You Were On My Mind. When I woke up this morning, You Were On My Mind. If you listen to the oldies station, you've heard that one before. And that was a huge hit, and the album did really well, but the album wasn't very good. But it took them 2 years to deliver a follow-up to that, and this was it. And by then, whatever momentum they had was gone. This missed the charts completely, and yeah, that was kind of the end of the band. A couple members tried to reform with a new singer and reinvent themselves as a country rock group, and it just didn't really work. But anyway, yeah, I've managed to accrue 3 copies of this thing over the years, and not even really through trying. So when I got this one, this was a Fleabay-ism, but this is when I got my first decent reel-to-reel machine. And I was just looking for any half-decent album that I could get cheap. So I wasn't looking for anything great, but yeah, this was one that I was able to pick up for, I think, around $10 after shipping. And I have a copy of this on vinyl that I had found in a thrift store bin way back when for like $1 or less. It's a terrible pressing, I should note. And I've also owned this on CD as a twofer with that first We 5 album. And yeah, that was really more me just trying to have a We 5 greatest hits of sorts. But anyway, yeah, this is another 3 3/4 inch per second deal, but this one actually sounds pretty dang decent. And I closed one of my reel-to-reel episodes with an excerpt from one of the songs here, taken from this copy of the album. And you can see I gave it a liter at one point. This still has the sticker on it to hold your tape down, but it's not very good anymore, so I just made a new one. But yeah, as far as those slow speed tapes go, this is actually a pretty dang nice sounding tape. When I got my first, decent, proper reel-to-reel machine, I, really wanted to have at least a few albums to my name. And so I went, looking for some online, and I swore that one of those albums would be something that I really genuinely loved and was already really nice and familiar with. And so the one that I picked out was this one. Simon and Garfunkel, Sounds of Silence. Their second album, it's from 1966. And it's the only real true folk rock album they ever made. I mean, it still has some acoustic moments on it. But yeah, so back during the Napster era, I had downloaded the 2 hits from this thing. And I gave up on Napster pretty quickly. I did an episode on it fairly recently, actually. And I started trying to round up the albums where those songs had come from. And one of the first ones I tried to find was Sounds of Silence. And I just got lucky and happened to find a copy at Tower Records almost immediately. And so I latched onto that sucker. And I proceeded to listen to that album right into the freaking ground. Over the years, there's a couple of songs on it that I don't care as much for anymore, but I'll still say 9 out of 11 for this one. And I still consider it just a really good album. I consider Bookends to be their best, actually. But anyway, yeah, this became the tape, my good tape, and the one that I was going to spend some coin on, which wound up being, I think, $20. And I wanted it to be a nice 7.5 inch per second tape. Now, I know I've been lamenting about Columbia tapes throughout this, but those have all been 3 3/4 inch per second tapes. This one actually sounds really good, dare I say, and it has kind of a punch to it that I really wasn't expecting compared to the CD I had owned. But so much so I actually went and did a transfer at the time of this just to have a copy of the reel-to-reel real nice and handy, that I could refer to if I wanted. But yeah, this was the biggie for me, and it stands as really one of the 3 true biggies that I consider to be in my collection, the Rascals album being one of the others. So on that initial search for reel-to-reel tapes, after the Simon & Garfunkel one, it was, okay, what can I get at a good price that I've at least heard, ideally already own, and there's at least a couple of good cuts on it. And so the best I could do, really, certainly for a 7.5 inch per second tape, was Peter, Paul and Mary, album 1700 from 1967, named after the catalog number. And it's home to two of their biggest hits, I Dig Rock and Roll Music and Leaving on a Jet Plane. And as implied by that first song title, this is where they started to grudgingly dip their toe into folk rock. Having said this, this is a very hit and miss album for me. I'd say like 4 out of 12 cuts are keepers in my book. And I had already owned this on vinyl, so I knew what I was getting into. But yeah, it was more just economics and that some level of familiarity that got me to pick this one up. Funnily enough, I have never owned this one on CD. But anyway, yeah, full tilt, 7.5 inch per second tape here. And it probably won't be readable on the label, but it sets you up almost to think that it's the first self-titled Peter, Paul and Mary album here, but no, this is indeed the 1967 album. And it does not sound great. Something was a bit up with the mastering. I mean, it's still perfectly acceptable, but yeah, it was a slight disappointment, especially next to the Simon and Garfunkel album. And funnily enough, this is actually also the only regular Peter, Paul and Mary album that I have ever owned. The only other one I've ever had was a Greatest Hits, and that's the only one I've ever had on CD. Back in 2017 or 18, I did an episode called Dolby the Hard Way. So I had found an outboard Dolby unit, TIAC brand Dolby unit, at a thrift store, and I wound up doing a whole episode on it, and those were mostly to be used in tandem with an open reel tape deck. You could use it with a cassette deck if you wanted to, but yeah, it meant I was going to have to try and find some Dolby B encoded tapes. So I picked out 2, and those will be our last 2 today. And this was the first of them, and this is the one that was just strictly based on economics. Okay, what can I get the cheapest? And at that moment, it happened to be this, I think, slightly later issue of the Dr. Zhivago soundtrack, originally from 1968. And whoever sold this to me, they did it right. They had a couple of styrofoam blocks in there to hold the tape in place. They'd also used a then fresh piece of leader tape to tape it down. It has leader on it, real proper white leader. I don't know if the previous owner did that or some previous owner, or if that was MGM, I suppose it would have been, that had done it. But yeah, and it's a perfectly good sounding tape. I did excerpt it in that episode, and yeah, mission accomplished. And of course it's got the liner notes just on a single piece of paper there that would have been on the back cover of the LP. As far as this album goes, it's perfectly fine as music, but by the same token, it does kind of, in my opinion, play better in the movie Dr. Zhivago. So yeah, I certainly don't regret picking this one up at all. And on to my final album. So with regards to the whole Dolby thing, I'd always heard that the gold standard for Dolby encoded reel-to-reel tapes were these classical tapes. And you may have seen these before. They all had the same basic stop sign, I guess you could say, sort of design. But these things were manufactured by Barclay Crocker. And I mean, I get why they're considered the gold standard of classical on reel-to-reel. It sounds really nice. And I think I spent maybe about $20 on this at the time. And as it turns out, that would be the cheapest I'd ever see one of these things. I've looked a few times in the years since, and I think the best price I've seen for a Barclay Crocker tape, certainly a Dolby encoded one, was like $50. I mean, the price has just gone completely out of control for these things. But the nice thing and kind of the dirty little secret about these Barclay Crocker tapes is that these can double as a calibration tape for your Dolby unit. So these start with a series of calibration tones, or just one, I think, come to think of it. But it's pretty accurate, as I found, and I was able to pretty accurately dial in, calibrate my Dolby unit just using this tape. And yeah, it probably could use it again. I still have the Dolby unit sitting with the reel-to-reel machine, but it is crazy rare that I actually use it. And I actually much prefer Dolby on open reel tape over a cassette. It plays a lot nicer on a higher speed tape. But yeah, I actually consider this really, truly one of my best tapes. Even if I'm not a big classical person, yeah, I really do like having this one around. Anyway, that's going to be it for today. I think I've blabbed on more than long enough. I'll talk to you again soon.